the zone to be. From a yin to my yang to my yang to Z. Put a grin on my chin when you come to me. Cause I'll win, I'm a one of a kind, and I'll bring death to the place you're about to be. Another river of blood running under my feet. Forged in a fire lit long ago. Stand next to me, you'll never stand alone. I'm last to leave, but the first to go. Lord, make me dead before you make me old. I feed on the fear of the devil inside of the enemy faces in my sight. Aim with a hand, shoot with a mind, kill with a heart like Arctic ice.
I am a soldier and I'm marching on.
I am a soldier and I'm marching on.
I am a warrior, this is my song.
I am a warrior and this is my song. I bask in the glow of the rising war, lay waste to the ground of an enemy shore.
I read you Lima Charlie, loud and clear.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of of Lima Charlie, sponsored by Stu and the Nun. And I am Stu here, and as you can see, I'm with my good friend, a guest from I would say old guest, but he's not. Don't pay attention to the color of the beard. He is, but he's been a longtime friend and guest of our shows, Mr. Rusty Bradley. Hey, Rusty, how you doing, buddy?
How are you, Stu?
Good, man. It's been too long. I'm glad we had a few minutes before we started this to catch up, but good to see you and hear you again. And I know you've been a busy cat, and I thank you for giving us a little time to come on and do this episode. So
Oh,
following
man,
right
thank you.
along. Oh, go ahead.
No. I just thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, buddy. So we'll get right into it, following along our theme on this and stuff. Kind of, we like to open up a little bit about why did young Rusty join the military? What was it? What compelling event happened in your childhood or life that led you to say this is where I want to go? And how did that path take hold? How did it happen?
Wow. Honestly, for me, it was pretty easy. It's kind of a very small town story. My dad got sick when I was a junior in high school, and he made me promise him that I would do at least 1 year in college. And I got a football scholarship to play. And when you make a commitment to somebody, especially somebody you love, you don't have an option of bowing out of it. And so anyway, I begged, borrowed, and stole everything I could get to put myself through college and um, not put any financial burden on my parents. And worked 16 hour or took 16 hours worth of semester hours, worked two part-time jobs, played college football, and once I finished, which was in the early 90s, I owed 20 something $1,000, which is a lot of money back then. So I was working double shifts at the beer warehouse, Coors warehouse in Asheville, North Carolina. I was kind of pissing and moaning one night after a double shift, and I ran into an old friend of mine, and we had been in high school JROTC together. And he literally was like, "Hey, man, come see me tomorrow. I'll show you some options." And my dad was a Vietnam veteran he was in the reserves and a medic during Vietnam. And he was like, "Absolutely not. I'm not supporting this one bit." And I said, "Well, let's just see what he says." And I went to see him, and, back in the day, like floppy disks were the thing. And he showed me these dudes jumping out of airplanes and blowing stuff up. And I was like, show me that one. And, so anyway, he said, it's funny because being such a naive person, um, he said, "Where do you want to go in the world?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "You can pick he said, "Dude, I'm your recruiter, man. If you want to go in the infantry, keep your nose clean for 3 or 4 years. We'll pay off all your college debt, send you anywhere you want to go in the world. You can start a new life debt free." And I'm like, "Well, where would I choose?" Like, he said, "Where do you want to go in the world?" I said, "I don't know. You're South America. Like, where do they have army bases beside the United States? He said, go to Germany, you know, go to Panama, go to Hawaii. And I was like, they got an army base in Hawaii? And he goes, yeah, Schofield Barracks. I'm like, so you can send me to Hawaii and I'll do my tour there. And he's like, yeah, no problem. I'll send you the 25th. Go on the infantry. You'll learn and use everything you used growing up. He said, you'll love it. And I'm like,
Sounds too good to be true.
yes, bingo. And basically, he said, you're going to get paid to run through the woods and do this, that, and the other. And I know I'd sound probably stupid, but I was so naive. I'm like, well, okay, if you're going to pay off my college debt, like, what do I do for clothes? Where do I live? Like, how am I going to eat? And he's like, no, dumbass, you, the army is going to pay you that like a bonus. And I'm like,
Uncle Sam's going to give you all that 3 squares a day and a cot.
going to give me clothes, going to give me a room to sleep in, and you're going to let me run around the woods and play GI Joe, which I did as a kid my whole life, and just froze and got bug bitten and spider bitten. And I was like, okay. So he wrote me up a contract, and I took it home to my dad, and my dad did one of those. He just wasn't buying it, and he was like, "You're a grown man now, and I'm very proud of you for what you did in college, and you kept your word. And if you think this is what you ought to do," and I'm like, well, I can keep making $6 an hour paying for the next 15 or 20 years to get rid of my college debt, or I could go do this and knock it out in 3 years. And um, best thing I ever did. Best thing I
Yeah.
ever did.
Did you go to the 25th?
I did. I was in 114 infantry in C quad, the old C quad. That's oh my gosh, I could keep you here for 6 hours telling you stories. I made some of the best friends. Um, it's where I found my purpose in life, and like what I feel like the Lord created me to do with all the gifts that I feel like He's given me. And um, you get like lots of time off. You work hard, you play hard, and I got to go to Thailand. Excuse me, I got to go to Thailand, Japan twice, Malaysia, Singapore. We did a deployment to Australia where back then they would let you take leave after you did a temporary duty someplace, for like they would always have these big exercises where you'd have the Australian commandos and these different units that would come to the 25th, because who doesn't want to come to Hawaii, right? So then the obligation is then you get to go to their country and train for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And that was how I got my real introduction to the rest of the world. And then Sequad is still there in Hawaii, but it was one of those places in my mind, because I grew up with a grandfather that served um, in the Pacific during World War II. He was a tin can soldier. He was on a destroyer. The first one got sunk. They recommissioned another one, renamed it, and went back right back out. He spent 4 years in the Pacific, and it made me feel connected to that. And every day we would come in to do PT formation, and we always surprise old school. You had to be there at 5:30 to do the barracks inspections, and um, you got to be 30 minutes early for everything. Um, and every day you would walk past where the bullet holes from the Japanese Zeros, where they strafed the barracks, and it was a very real reminder of what you were training for and preparing for every day. And
Probably one of the few places in a peacetime environment where you could still see the remnants of a time of war. I mean, in the United States, even though it was outside the CONUS, there's not any places that are going to have that. Short of what happened after 9/11, but you're not going to have those kind of signs anywhere. near where you're going to be stationed, and still be in the States. So that's
Well, the probably one of the most impactful things that I did when I was there um, was I was a bit of a different animal because I came in, a PFC out of college, and then once I finished basic training AIT, I was a specialist. And I got to my first duty station, and like I said, it for me, it was where I think the Lord meant for me to be, and everything just clicked. And 4 years later, I was a promotable E5, getting ready to make E6, and I had kind of like I had done everything. I'd gotten my EIB. I had college. I was 4 years older than everybody else, and I had this First Sergeant Sanchez who had just come from the 82nd, and he was wide open. Man, he was wide open. I love that guy. And I was supposed to get 6 months of college as part of my reenlistment bonus, and I kept getting stuck on all these details because I pretty much I've been to Ranger School, been to Airborne School, and I'm like, I don't want to do EIB again. I'm supposed to go to college. And the first sergeant was like, Bradley, let me tell you something. You better figure out something to do. I can tell the company commander, your ass is going to be on EIB again. So I got this bright idea that I want to go to scuba school. And the only scuba school we could get to was the Navy Dive and Salvage School. And back when we had the old dial up phones, and I went to the CQB desk back when they still had CQ duty. I don't know if they do anymore. But I opened up a phone book and I started calling everybody in the Navy. I didn't know nothing about that. I knew about Pearl Harbor, but that was it. I didn't know a captain was basically a colonel in charge of a ship in the Navy. And I found this thing called NavSpec Warcom. And I called this lady and I was like, hey, I'm Sergeant Bradley up here at Schofield Barracks, and I want to go to scuba school. She was like, pardon my language, I'm just saying what she said. And she had to be in her like 60s. And she's like, are you shitting me? Is this a joke? Was this Claude from over in S1? I'm like, no, this is not. And she said, you're an Army soldier asking me for a Navy slot to go to dive school. I said, yes, ma'am, I am. And she said, well, you need to come down and see the commander and CPO and talk to them. She said, if they approve it, I'll give you 2 slots. You got to find somebody to go with you. And I was like, yes, ma'am, not a problem. I mean, like I said, by then I was at E4 when I went to Ranger School, so um, they made it very tough to go from an overseas assignment. You had to go to like battalion RIP, the battalion Ranger indoctrination program, the division Ranger
yeah,
indoctrination program, the pre-Ranger indoctrination program. Then you had to go to Benning and go through their Ranger indoctrination program before you ever got to Ranger School. So by the time I got to Ranger School, it was like you want 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, and I mean I'm a big dude. I was an offensive lineman, and I was running like 12, 32 miles, and you learn what it meant to exceed the standard if you wanted to succeed. Because the thing that I think we talked about this one time before, I don't know what the Army is like now. I'm very fascinated and very proud of the soldiers that have stepped up in the Army, and especially in the soft community of the guys that are following behind us. But if you were going to go anywhere, you had to prove to people that you were going to make your way, and you had to exceed the standard. The standard is the bare minimum.
right.
And that was in
Yeah.
your personal conduct, your professional conduct, and everything. So I got in my pickup truck and I told First Sergeant Sanchez, I'm like, hey, um, I got to go down to Pearl because I got a meeting with scuba school commander and sergeant major. And I went rushing down there, and it's on Ford Island. So I drove on to Ford Island. And once I got there, uh, there was nobody in the school. And I wandered around in my old woodlands until I found the um, chief CPO's office, chief petty officer's office, and the guy's name was Master Diver Reese. and I saw it was the only door. Somebody was in there, and I knocked on the door. You know, I didn't know the protocol, so I was like, Sergeant, First Sergeant, Sergeant Major, Sergeant Bradley reports. Walked in, saluted, and he's like, I'm a GD NCO. And I was very intimidated. So this guy had to be, I'm not kidding you, 5'8", probably benched about 450 pounds. He had a scar going down his forehead where he'd been run over by a boat and a boat prop. And he was like, look at me, boy, is this what you want? And I was like, I want to be a diver. And he was like, find somebody that can make it because you ain't going to graduate unless both of you make it. I was like, Roger that, Chief. And he was like, get out of my office. Roger that. And I went back. Like 2 days later, the battalion commander, battalion sergeant major from 114 calls me in the office and goes, why do you have orders from NAVSPEC Warcom to go to Navy Dive and Salvage School? And I was like, because I asked. And they said, if you can make it, we'll give you a slot. I was like, I thought that's personal initiative. It's, sua sponte, right? That's what we're supposed to do. And they said, if you got the balls, don't let us down. And I took a guy with me that wanted to go, and he was very interested in succeeding. And the reason I say all that is not to try to promote myself. It probably doesn't sound that way, but one of the last things that we got to do when we did our last qualifying dive, open water dive, was we got to go when they brought the USS Missouri in before she got repainted and reconstructed and everything. And we took our graduation photos on the teakwood decks where the Japanese surrendered after World War II.
Wow.
And part of your last dive is you have to do like an underwater survey of a certain given grid. And when we were diving in front of the Mo, there was, I'll never forget, there was a boot and like a coffee cup and a saucer, and you don't touch anything. Like you're making, underwater graphic pictures and diagrams
Right.
of everything that's down there. And it was from the Arizona.
Yeah, because
And
the
I just
Arizona's
remember
right in
thinking,
front of where they put the Mo, right? Yeah,
yes, sir.
I knew you were right on the aft end of that. Yeah, yeah. So you're seeing the remnants down at the
And
bottom of the seafloor.
100%. And
Wow.
you're literally swimming in a piece of history. As a matter of fact, one of the dive and salvage teams that they brought in when they were dredging Pearl, they dug up one of the unexploded torpedoes that sunk down in like 10 feet of silt that they found when they were dredging. And the instructors who were teaching our class had to go out there with a UXO team, and they demoed the warhead and kept it, and it's now in the Arizona Memorial, and you're in that piece of history. And for me personally, it was a way of connecting my personal past with the stories that I heard from my grandfather into, I didn't realize at the time what my future was going to be in the service.
This is why I love this show, because no matter how well I know someone, Rusty, and I've had a few of my guys that I deployed with on there, but they were in different parts of Afghanistan or this or that, and that I knew. I have other friends of mine that I've had on here that I've known for 30 years from when we were in Korea together, that I learn about stuff all the time. Knowing I was going to have you on, retired Green Beret, did I ever imagine we were going to be talking about the USS Arizona or diving or Pearl Harbor? No idea you had that in your background. So I was just getting sucked in there. But I do want to pause for a second and rewind back just a touch, because we started, because I asked about, did you get to Hawaii? And I know that's how I went on a path. But let's back up to, you went in, you got recruited in. When you first came in, what was would you just go 11 X-ray, 11 Bravo? Like, what was the MOS you enlisted for? Was it just to be an infantryman
So I actually, yes, sir. So it was basically, I went in as an 11 Bravo, and um,
with a college degree? So you went enlisted with a college
yes,
degree. Had you finished college? Yeah.
yes. So I
Okay.
had already graduated with a 4-year degree in sociology, And the funny thing is, you never know what kind of turn God has in store for you because like everybody else, I think I had a high school sweetheart since the seventh grade. She wanted to get married. I wanted to finish college. I really wanted to go into federal law enforcement. And at the time, you had to do like, I think 2 or 3 years in local law enforcement before you could even apply to the feds. And I did my internship with the Marshal Service. Um, but that relationship fell apart. And she ended up marrying the guy who ran all of the um, law enforcement training in Western North Carolina. And so that door was kind of closed for me. And I was really feeling down. And I had a great college, my mentor and advisor. And she said, look, she said, what do you like to do? And I really had to think about it. So growing up in, small town Appalachia, where pretty much where you live is the circumference of your life and your world. So my next door neighbors were my great aunt and uncle, and he had been a Marine in World War II. That's another whole series of stories. But they had, and it's hard for young people to imagine today. There used to be these things called encyclopedias, and that was how you knew about the world. And she had a full set of 1984 encyclopedias, and I would go in her basement and start in the A's. And it was like that's how you learned about Africa and all the countries in Africa and the languages and the people. And you see all these
Yeah.
beautiful places and different people and uniforms and excuse me, clothing. And I just became so interested in the world outside of the bubble that I lived in. So my advisor said, why don't you study sociology, which is the study of societies, cultures, and languages? And I got into it, man, and I found my jam. And I didn't realize it when I was in college. So fast forward, I get into the Army. And at some point when I was in 114, I got moved to the scout platoon because they wanted all the ranger guys and airborne guys to do their version of what they thought was, the closest thing to special operations. And it was amazing because you got to do a lot of the stuff you felt like you were trained to do. Well, one of my first squad leaders was a guy named Maurice Duclos, who ended up being an absolute legend in first group and I think a CW5. And I think he was half Thai and half Laotian. So when we were getting ready to do our deployment to Thailand, at lunchtime, you had to roll. So we were doing combatives while everybody else was eating chow and BSing and jackassery. We were in the office, pads down, in our PTs, doing combatives, and he's teaching us Thai, teaching us all the moves in Thai. How do you introduce yourself? How do you, like all of the basic, even though you sound like a third grader, I hungry am, subject, object, verb, you learn to speak backwards, how they do everything. But I started, you start learning how to converse. And every now and then my wife gets aggravated at me because when we go to a Thai restaurant, I'll
You break it out.
throw out a few words and she's like, shut up. Like you sound, it's that Southern Appalachian accent, which is what they used to make fun of me in Pashto with. But the thing is it's a bridge because you're trying to learn what their culture, their language, their everything. And that was the real turning point for me when I was in college was studying sociology. I didn't know at the time, to kind of regress, was that was absolutely what I needed 10 or 15 years from joining the
Yeah.
Army, because when I got to SF, like it opened the door that I knew and understood. And if people will be open to, like you said, if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. And there's times when I was doing what I was getting paid to do, and I almost felt ashamed because I was so happy being there doing that. and it
Well,
was just it,
that recruiter told you got to run around Hawaii and play Army in the Woods, and you were surprised you were going to get paid for that and get free uniforms and food. I mean,
and I did.
man, but you're right. For the special forces mission, the true core mission of FID, sociology, if someone were to go, how do you prepare for that from the civilian sector? The army will do great at whipping you into shape. Sociology, absolutely, the study of socioforms and religions and cultures and all that stuff, that's the best thing to have, to be able to embed with an indigenous force around the world, regardless of where it is, east, south, north, or west, and work with people and understand them and that kind of stuff. I mean, I never even thought about it. That's probably the best and college path you could ever take to be a Green Beret, the way Green Berets are meant to be. And in my opinion, just a guy who was born at Fort Bragg and raised around SF in the 70s, my whole 80s, my whole life. But
Well, you don't
yeah,
realize
that's
the
that.
things that you learn, honestly, when you get on the battlefield. Like when we first got there, my second deployment, I think in 2004, 2005, and we were actually going out and working with and meeting with the tribal elders. Um, we were in a very contentious northern district of Kandahar called Coat, and I kept meeting with a couple of the village elders. And I eventually found out that one of them, because I would go and visit him every week, that it was odd because the threat level kept dropping. And, um, or if we rode up certain roads, there were what I would say indiscriminate obstacles that would keep us from going that direction or turning that direction. And what I eventually found out was that one of the village elders, chiefs, um, kept saying he didn't have anything to do with the insurgency. They didn't have any fighters. Everywhere you went, you saw women and kids. And after I spent quite a bit of time with this guy, he had two sons, and the one thing he wanted to give them was to teach them how to write their name. And we wrote his name out in Pashto, and I would practice. I would let him, just take a Sharpie and practice with him. And once he felt like it was good enough, he was like, maybe I have a few people that can help you. If you need 100 fighters, I'll give you 100 fighters. I'm like, okay, well, now this just went from foreign internal defense. So now we can actually do counterinsurgency and unconventional warfare because I have a freaking army of dedicated
Right.
dudes that just by tribe and name, they're going to fight where I ask them to fight. And of course, you know, as well as I do, it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from or what your language or religion is. Once you make a connection with people and they feel like they can trust you, um, they will fight side by side with you if they feel like you're going to stand right there with them. And it changes the entire dynamic of what you're trying to accomplish. Because for me, the more successful I was on a battlefield with the team of guys that I had, that meant I I felt like less soldiers had to be deployed because we could be more effective against the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's good. That is a good highlight of why that's so critical. And like you say, with or without a degree, and the degree gave you a lot of the probably the book knowledge and education, but it's about treating people right and being true to your word. So I'm going to back up again. I know we could go for hours, but so you got in, you were in 114, you're in infantry. Where did it come about? How did your career initially change? How'd you end up in special forces? I guess what was because that's obviously it's its own thing. What was the compelling event? What was the trigger? What was the opportunity presented to you? You went to Navy dive school. I'm assuming you and your buddy both got through um, the dive school. You came out of that. When did you get to special forces, or how did you get there?
It's funny you said that because kind of the first introduction we got, one of the things that the instructors, because a lot of the dive instructor Okay, let me back up. Once you've been to Army Ranger School, you learn more about yourself than you do anything else. It's like you can you can go as far as you want to go. What do you want to do? And I think for me, being in Rangers, going to Ranger School and then planting that seed, being in a scout platoon with great leaders. Oh, um, Sergeant Duclos, who was at E7 at the time, had been in SF and had a break in service. So he was coming back and he got to be our squad leader for, I think, about a year before he went back to either SOCPAC or first group. And then going to the dive school, most of the instructors, so where the dive school is at the south end of Fort Island is almost directly across from SEAL Team One and where the SDV teams are. And I went to church with a couple of those guys. So when we finished dive school, one of the requirements is you're supposed to do, if you're going to be an Army combat diver, you're supposed to do Draeger training, your rebreather training. So it's not fun when you're in the dive school because they take you over and you go to the pull-up bars and you call out insults to the SEALs and they turn the formation over to the SEALs and then they do PT with you for like 2 hours before you go and literally jump in the I guess it's the Pacific Commander's home. He's got an Olympic sized swimming pool with like 4 lanes, and you go over there every day and get in his pool. You're preparing for dive week. And those guys would just PT the crap out of us. And they did our Draeger training for about a week. And you get to see once you like you see that little crack behind the facade of, and what it's like to be supported and have those guys that were, I mean, they knew we weren't trying to be bud students. We were trying to learn about being good Navy divers. But for those of us who were in the Army, we had to go through additional training for us to get qualified. And they were like, there was no FEF games. It was like, look, this is what you need to know. This is how you do. This is your mixtures. This is your this. This is your that. This is how deep you can go. These are your dives. This is blah blah blah. And it was a real kind of a hands-on training. And then fast forward after I did that, uh, came back to 114, and the battalion commander came to me one day and said, "What are you doing? Like, why are you not fully maximizing your potential? Would you like to go to officer candidate school?" And I was like, never thought of it. I was very happy being, uh, an NCO and getting to teach, coach, and mentor, a lot of trouble kids, young kids, um, and see them progress and grow and become great soldiers and great people. And I thought about it and thought about it. And uh, so, quick caveat, we did a training event we went to Japan and we got to work with our Japanese counterparts from the Japanese Defense Forces. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, our sergeant major's name was Fasavala, the battalion sergeant major. And we're having this, we get called out like 2 o'clock in the morning. There's 2 feet of snow on the ground. We're in, I think, Amori, Japan, like the northernmost island. We're and I'm pissed because they're walking our guys. We're going to get like 2 hours sleep, blah, blah, blah. And I'm cussing, raising hell. And the sergeant major's right there, and I don't give up, whatever. And basically, we get there, and it's a promotion ceremony for me. And I'm getting promoted to E6, and I feel about that tall. And I apologized. And he said, "That is the reason that I want you to become an officer." He said, "I want that level of ferocity for your soldiers." And he said, "That's missing in a lot of what's coming out of um, the institutional officers and commanders." And man, he just sank his hooks into me. Well, not long after that, I had met my wife and I had gotten my SFODD letter. And it was like, hey, we're interested. You know, if you want to come and try, we'll be interested. And I didn't really
Yeah, because
understand what their mission was.
you already checked a lot of blocks, right? You scuba qualified, airborne, ranger. I mean, you had done a lot of the career, if not more than most, because there are too many Army guys that got scuba qualified that aren't in that,
Yeah,
lesser
I was
in.
on a sniper team as a E4. Um,
Yeah,
Guy named Sergeant Thaddeus Benton. That dude's one of the greatest marksmen to this day I have ever seen. And he was the actual sniper, and I was his spotter. And got to work with him. I mean, basically, I had not been to the only thing I hadn't done. I think I had not been to Pathfinder school. I had not been to Halo, and I had not been in SF or Delta.
right. So
And that was
you
the
were a
only four
prime candidate for
blocks left to
them.
check.
Yeah, you were a
Yes,
prime
sir.
candidate. So okay, so you got your letter from them, and then so where did you go? OCS first, or did you go to? I'm assuming you went to
So
OCS first.
I was home on leave and I met my wife, and bravest woman I've ever met, to be very honest. And probably within a year, we did a long term relationship. We got married. She came over when I was in Hawaii for the last, I think, year and a half, 2 years. And then my orders came for me to go to OCS. And I just kind of figured, well, I'll shelve the soft thing because I got a family to take care of, and that was something that was very dear to me. Was I wanted to be a husband and father because all this army stuff is great, but without somebody to go home to every day, it's pretty cold, you know, kind of
Yeah.
lifestyle. And so I got my orders to go CS. My wife was 8 months pregnant. We went to Fort Benning, and I went to the Fort Benning School for Boys, what they used to call it back in the
Yep.
day. And
I think it was wasn't it Fort Benning School for Wayward Boys? I thought that
yeah,
was seemed like I
it
remember my
was.
dad calling it
Yeah,
that.
I might have actually left that out, you know, unintentionally, but it really was. And it was a great opportunity because I got to be around a bunch of other guys that I would end up being friends with over for the next 30 years. And they were all like me. They were all guys who had served, as NCOs and wanted to take that leadership pattern and move it to the next level. And I, there's a whole bunch of stuff in between, but I ended up, there was a problem with the orders. I was afraid I was going to get sent to the 3rd Infantry Division. I called back to the RIP shed in Hawaii, the Ranger Indoctrination Program. I was like, I know a bunch of you guys just came from like first group, second or first battalion, second battalion, third battalion. Hey, can you guys give me orders to um, go to the, at least third Ranger Battalion? And then I got there, and actually, it was funny because General Stan McChrystal was the Ranger commander at Sergeant Major Hall, were the command team there. And I think Colonel Warszynski, who ended up commanding the 101st during Operation Anaconda, was the deputy. And I got there, I was getting ready to in process, and a couple of weeks went by. I was just doing PT, getting ready for rope. Uh, I think that's what they called it back then. And they said, "Hey, sorry, but your orders just came for OCS. You got to go." And I went to officer candidate school, finished there, and then I had some time between the infantry officer basic course. So I went over to the Ranger Regiment, worked a couple of months over there, then went to IOBC. Well, once I got my IOBC certification as an infantry officer, went back to the Ranger Regiment, and I was all excited because I thought I had a shoe in. And like I said, it comes back to standards. Standards are there for a reason. And Sergeant Major Hall was like, look, you weren't officially assigned here. as an NCO, so we can't take you as an officer. You have to go 2 years into the regular services before we can accept you to come back. And he said, I don't think you have a problem coming back, but you got to go somewhere first. I said, well, where do you think I should go? And Colonel McChrystal at the time said, just go to 82nd. That's where we process all the good 82nd 101st. That's where we process guys out of, or bring a lot of guys out of. So I said, no problem. I went back and got my orders to go to Fort Bragg, and my wife had our baby. She went home and to Asheville, North Carolina, and had our baby. They gave me like a 4-day pass from OCS because I was number 2 in the class, and got to see my daughter for a couple of weeks. And that's when I learned really how strong my wife was. That, you know, after I'd been, the Army had made an absolute load of promises. Oh yes, we'll get you there. We'll get you there. We'll get you there. And then when I got a call that night, your wife's in labor, the first sergeant came to me and like put his arm around me, and I was like, I'm not going to be happy. Like, this is not going to turn out well for anybody, probably the commander or anybody else that's on staff duty tonight. And he was like, look, man, there's nothing I can tell you. If you want to withdraw yourself, you can. But the commander said no. And I was like, noted. So I got to talk to my wife, and my wife was like, don't you ever quit. Don't you ever effing quit at anything. She said, I got this. She said, if they'll give you a pass, and they did, they gave me a 4-day pass. I did my exams, took off right after, and went home, got to see my daughter, and spent 4 days at home and came back. And then I was more devoted than ever, that I was never going to be that commander who broke his word unless I got forced into a situation where I couldn't do anything about it.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, those it's amazing how those life events, whether in or out of the military, shape us not only as part of our military career, but everything in life, right? So I know for a fact you probably have carried those same principles and characteristics well after you have retired and uh and changed out IV cards. But yeah, we may have to do this in a couple part show. We're definitely gonna have to get it. But so let's talk. So you got there, you did OCS, and then how long before you went to Q course and went to SF?
So funny you should ask. I so I got my order. Well, I got orders to go to the 82nd, but it wasn't until December. So I went back to the Ranger Regiment to ask them if I could blackbird over there for a couple of months. And I said, look, is there any course, anything that I can go to bide my time? And so they got me into the long range reconnaissance course that was there at Fort Benning. Huge, because I had no idea. I look back at it now, my personal opinion is that everything that I did and every step that I took, God was preparing me, because all the old Soviet era stuff that we studied is exactly what we fell in on when I
Right.
got to Afghanistan. And then, so I finished the long range reconnaissance course, went back to the, kind of bounce between or the officers course and the Ranger Regiment, because the officers course didn't really know what to do with me because they thought that I belonged to the Ranger Regiment. The Ranger Regiment was like, well, we can't really take you. So they put me on leave, and I went to,
Yeah, you
after
didn't
the
you talk
worst.
about wayward boys. You didn't have a paragraph line number anywhere. You didn't have a billet anywhere. You were kind of bouncing, like
Yeah,
crashing on friends.
I was
You were
acting like I
crashing.
was in SF before I was actually in SF.
Yeah, you were crashing on friends' couches, finding the friends being different military schools and units, trying to find a place to go.
Well, I just didn't,
Yeah,
like I said, I didn't want to get stuck in the third ID, and I
right.
just, that wasn't. and my wife wasn't really happy at Fort Benning, and we just wanted to get closer back to home. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, get to the 82nd. That's what Crestone Hall said, and get a couple of years knocked out, and you can go back. Well, then I go to the 3rd Battalion, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment at the 82nd, and um, because I was a prior service guy, I only got like 5 months platoon leader time, and then I got moved over to a specialty, what they call Delta platoon, anti-tank platoon. Which, sorry, I got sideways earlier, but after I finished uh, when I was in basic training, when I went to AIT, I finished, and there was like 3 weeks left after AIT, and I said, "Hey, I want to do this course that they got for the anti-tank gunners." And the only reason I didn't go to MLOC or the mortars course was because it was longer than I had left over. So they let me go to um, the anti-tank course as an infantry guy, and then I did that, and then that fell right in when I got to the 82nd 10 years later, because I got to go to the tow platoon for the 82nd, and then um, quickly got moved up to the brigade support company staff. And on, oh gosh, like January, no, like March of 2001, we did a mass tac drop on, I think, Holland drop zone, and I had a partial collapse in my parachute, fractured 2 vertebrae and a disc in my neck, and had to have spinal surgery. And then when I came off of leave was like September 3rd, 2001. So I did my refresher training for to get back on jump status, and I came back in. There was this great big tall guy who was the S1. His name was Sergeant Smith, and he was like, "Hey, sir, did you hear that some jackass flew an airplane into the World Trade Center?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, he didn't think anything of it. Dude must have been hammered or stupid." And then I don't know how long after that it was, the second plane flew in, and then everything kind of collapsed. And the battalion commander brought us all in, and we went on, Ready Force One status immediately. And so I did my first deployment to Afghanistan in 2002 with the 82nd, right after
Wow.
um, Anaconda. And the thing was, with me being the support company commander, I was in regular communication with the 101st guys right after Anaconda. And it was funny because, I still have this NCO mentality about getting the job done, even though I'm wearing, you know, I think I was a first lieutenant by then. And I had a motor pool sergeant, motor warrant, and they're sending us these lists of all this damaged equipment. And it's like 11 Gators and Humvees and this, that, and the other. Well, remember, this was the period of time right after um, George Bush came in, after Clinton had. We didn't have, for example, one of the requirements in 82nd is you have to have 30 days of POL, petroleum, oil, and lubricants on hand to go to war anytime. We didn't have 5 days worth. We had no money for anything.
Right.
I had an impact
Yeah.
credit card. And I told the motor sergeant, I'm like, I don't care what the limit is, what the cost is. I said, we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment and parts that we've got to take over there, and we're going to war. So I don't trust Uncle Sugar to keep me fed, kept me armed, resupplied. I learned that in Lurse and as a ranger. So you go and buy everything that you need on that impact credit card, and I'll sign off on it. And we got to Afghanistan, and probably 2 months after we got there, CID showed up, and they did an investigation on me in Afghanistan for exceeding purchases on an impact credit card.
Until they found out why, I'm sure. And yeah,
Yeah, eventually they
yeah,
did, but you know, um, I was beyond angry, so I
yeah.
might have gone into the shower tent and tried to tear it down. Didn't go well. Um,
But so you went there.
It
So your
was my
first
first
deployment.
introduction to big boy rules.
Yeah, that was it. And that some people that don't understand what it takes to get the job done, and they're still following
Correct.
rules or regular. Yep, yep. Well, the um, I can imagine there have been many more lessons on that, knowing your career and impacts with that. But so you went. So your first point is at the 82nd, right after 9/11. And then when did how long after you pulled the SF trigger?
Well, I sent my packet. So I ran into actually a couple of guys that are not with us anymore. Mikey Duskin um, was in, I think, 19th group at the time. And I ran into a couple of guys that I had been enlisted with that were either Ranger Regiment or um, in the unit. And when we were in Kandahar, and they're like, look at you, man, high and tight, 82nd Lieutenant, blah, blah, blah. Like, you need to freaking come over to the dark side where the bad shit happens to bad people, man. And I just was like, you know what, you're right. Like, I've reached my ceiling, especially after the investigation. I reached my ceiling with the conventional forces. I'm like, I
Yeah.
got, I feel like I have a lot to offer, and I just want my chance to try out. So I literally started training when I was in Afghanistan to go to selection. And I can't remember, I think it was like 3 weeks or 4 weeks after I came back from my first deployment to war that I was in, I went to SF selection.
So yeah, you didn't bother trying to go back to the regiment. Just went right to SF selection and realized that's where you needed to be. And
Yep. I even had there was a full there was excuse me there was a light colonel at the time who was a brigade 3, and he told me, you better get selected because you don't have a job when you come back. And I was like,
why was that? Because you had
okay,
decided to go that route. They were like, they took it
that's
as
correct.
you were abandoning them. Yes,
That's
yes,
whatever their small syndrome is. And this is the same guy who ended up he was a commander over in Vincenza that left his wife and got thrown out of the army. His daddy had been a general. He was just a complete asshole. And
yeah,
he got exactly what he had coming. And again, that goes back to what kind of officer, what kind of leader do you want? I don't even want to say officer. What kind of leader do you want to be? And you're either going to live it or you're not. And
right.
I, I, I had the opportunity to, um, and it was like all the all the paths were pointing in that direction. And I thought, well, you know, if I don't do well, or if I don't like SF, then maybe I'll try something else. But I went to SF selection when I was 35 years old
Mm.
and
It-
loved it. Loved it, dude. I mean, I got to like shed all the responsibilities. I was one of the officers that got every single land navigation point. Like, I loved it.
you were the old dog then. Even in a selection, you were the old guy. Uh,
I was.
I mean, yeah, that's you
It
were
was
playing
salt and
young man's
pepper then. It
game.
wasn't Santa Claus
Yeah,
white.
that's right. It was you were playing a young man's game at that point. And did well, got through there, and I'm assuming, and then ended up what area? Because different than when my dad was in. I know now in the SF worlds, you kind of get assigned to theater, you get assigned, you kind of stay there. Back when my dad was in, it was you would bounce from group to group, seventh, third, 10th, kind of thing. But so where your focus is primarily fifth group? Is that where you ended up? Is that where you ended up going, or are you third?
Well, I was originally slated to go to fifth group. And of course, we were living at Fort Bragg at the time. And some of the guys that I went to church with and was in Bible study with, they were recruiting me heavily. Like, hey, we need some Mustangs to come in as the detachment commanders. And that was, honest to goodness, that was my first introduction. I had a guy in my Bible study named Brad, and he was a senior NCO over in third. And he said, if you want to come to third and get in the fight, he said, I will make sure that you get in. I'm like, really? He can do that? And he goes, by God, I can. And I'm like, Okay, show me. And they sent me to, um, so crazy. I went to the Armor Advanced School for captains because SF saw that a lot of the officers did not know how to do mechanized armor coin operations and they didn't know how to do resupply. So what's the best way to do that? I was like one of the first two guys that they sent to the Armor Advanced course, three guys, excuse me, that they sent to Armor Advanced course in Fort Knox, Kentucky. You know how hard it is to get a guy my size down in the M1 Abrams? Like you talk about bear greasing the hips, man.
Yeah.
And at one time, I held the one of our instructors. You know, you got to learn to drive every piece of it. And I'm like, I'm from the South, man. I grew up on NASCAR. I'm like, how fast will this thing go? The instructor was like, I don't know, 50, 55 miles an hour. And I'm like, I bet I can get it faster. And he's like, I bet you can't. And I'm like, if you got balls like that, case of beer. That's the rule. That's how we roll. And he's like, all right, case of beer. I'm like Guinness Tall Boys. That was my thing. That was my jam. Downhill, I floored that thing. I got it to like 62, 65 miles an hour, 70 tons rolling downhill. Oh, I
I'm
got my
glad they
ass
didn't
chewed
give
out.
you. I'm glad they didn't give you one with the governor off of it because they readjust them governors, and you would have had that thing smoking. You'd have been smoking the treads off of
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
and a
we did that. And then I went straight into,
the driver's cupola in an M1 is not only just small, it's just not easy to get in and out of by position. That is not a fun
not
thing to
even
climb in.
close.
Yeah,
You can like put your feet like this, like with your knees drawn up before I had all artificial joints. But no, I did the course, loved it. Learned a lot. Actually had a British instructor named McGregor who was fantastic, great. Even coming from Sandhurst, he was a great leader, great commander. It was my first real introduction to working with the Brits, and then it was very fast paced, and that's why I always try to give my wife as much kudos as possible because I went to that. I went to the captain's career course like 2 weeks after that. I came home, and then 3 weeks later, I was, excuse me, when I was in the captain's career course at Leavenworth, by then I had been selected into SF, and I talked to the SF branch manager, and he was like, "Hey, man, what do you want to do, dude? Like, you just got home from a deployment. You've been to two schools. You want to stay home, make babies for a while. You want some rollover time. Like, what do you want to do?" And I'm like, "No, I want to get in the Q course. Like, there's a fight going on, and I want to be in it." And he's like, "Are you sure?" That was the first time anybody in my career as an officer ever did anything but threaten you with, "Oh, we're going to send you to Korea for on a company
right.
tour for a year." And I was like, "No, I want to get in as quick and as deep as possible." And they did. They put me right into the Q course. And but real quick story. So most people who know or maybe they don't know, my team sergeant, one of my best friends in the whole world, Sergeant Major Lubers, Willie Lubers, was killed in 2013, and he was the detachment sergeant, team sergeant on ODA 331. And so I'm getting ready. I'm finishing the officers portion of the Special Forces qualification course, and I get a phone call on my little cell phone. It's like, "Hey, is this Captain Bradley?" And I'm like, "Yeah, who is this?" And he goes, "This is Master Sergeant Lubers. You're coming to ODA 331. You got time to meet tomorrow?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I think so." And he goes, "Don't worry, I'll call the SWIC instructor. I know so and so." He's like, "You'll be off tomorrow at lunch. You need to meet with me." I'm like, "Okay." So the way that they used to run the course back then is you finished the SF qualification course, and then you had, of course, Robin Sage, and then you went to SEER school. Well, they knew the deployments because we were doing 7, 8 months gone, home for 4 or 5 months, and then you're gone again. So he knew what the deployment timeline was. And here's a master sergeant who was so attuned to how his his ODA was operating. He wanted to know the guy who was coming in on his next combat deployment. So I met with him, and literally within 10 minutes, he goes, "Hey, tomorrow you're coming out to the shoot house with us." He's like, "You were in the Ranger Regiment like you did." And I said, "Well, very, temporarily, but I'm a prior service guy." He goes, "Good. We're getting the CRIF mission for all of Europe." And he said, "We're going to be breaking things and blowing shit up." And he's like, "We can't get that mission unless you get certified in the shoot house." So I've already talked to the battalion commander, the 1st Battalion, 3rd Special Forces Group Battalion commander, and you're going to come to the shoot house tomorrow. And I'm like, waves of, shit washing over me. I'm like, I'm still like, I don't even have my Green Beret yet. Like, I'm still in the course.
Right.
He's like, no, 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 I want to hear that. This is your appointed place of duty time. I've already talked to your instructor. You're going to be here. I show up at the shoot house in my little like Mazda hatchback 83, whatever. And they had a support guy there. They're like, "Here's your kit. Here's your weapon. Get changed." The support kid jumped in my car and took off. And I don't know where he went. And they're like, "Okay, here's the stack. Here's local support by fire. Here's how Salt 1 works. Here's Salt 2. It's like everything, Sephardic, Sodic, everything in a 3-hour crash course. What did I do? Like every good officer, first room we went into, pulling the trigger, I shot the hostage. I'm like, what?
That's why
Okay,
we
good target
train.
placement. Like, yeah, exactly. And it was such an overwhelming, like, this is real, man. This is big. Like, this is the grown-up leagues. Like, we're going to be operating alone and unafraid at the edge of civilization, and you better be our guy because we can't get this mission without you. And it really hammered home like what my responsibilities were going to be. And then I think we were out there for 2 days. Oh, and the battalion commander shows up and he walks over to Master Sergeant Lubers and he goes, "Is this going to be a problem?" And he's like, "No, sir, not a problem. He'll be dialed in. And sure enough, by like our 100th rotation at 21:30 that night, kid shows up with my little Mazda hatchback, give us all of our stuff, download your mags, clean your weapons. Hey, we'll see you in a couple months, Captain. Beat it. Get out of here." And I
he
did.
br- he brought your car back. Did he wash it and detail it first?
No, he did not.
So they called him. He brought your
Um,
car back, and you went back and gave him all his stuff back and went back to school. That
Lord's
was
honest
it.
truth. I went to Robin Sage, went to SEER School, which is another whole series of eye-opening experiences. But the day I graduated, 6 of my 10 team members were there to bring me food on graduation night. And you're not a very good, healthy, whole person when you get out of SEER School. And seeing those
Yeah.
guys made me figure out really quick that I was about to be. I'm a C-minus student and a second-rate commander, and I'm about to fall in on a Super Bowl quality team. And you better be on your A game every day.
So they were tracking you.
I,
They knew where you were, what you're doing, and they were there for you on the day you graduated when you were wrapped up and done to welcome you
yes, sir.
across the
Because we
threshold. Yeah.
because in 3 weeks we were deploying together. And they're like, "We're
Yeah.
not going to combat with a
Wow.
jackass. So you better be right." And I fell in love, man. I couldn't, like, everything I ever wanted and thought that from the people that I have known and worked with that were in MACV-SOG, or my JROTC instructor. I hope he's listening to this. His name's he was Lieutenant Colonel Mike Day. He was like, I don't even know what group he was in. He was a Green Beret during Vietnam, and he was like the ultimate teach, coach, mentor guy, even in high school. And Like those guys, when they set their mind to something, they are. I think Tom Spooner, which I knew when he was enlisted in seventh group before he went to Delta. Those dudes are wizards, man. You get the right ones, they are absolute wizards at what they do every single day when it comes to FID, UW, counterinsurgency. They just disappear, make a mission happen that nobody thinks is possible, and somehow convince other people to do it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, hey, Rusty, we've been going for over a little over an hour, and I knew we would. And we haven't even got into some of your downrange stories yet. So if you're okay with it, I like to break this up into two episodes. We'll do this one now, and we'll work out our schedules in the next couple of weeks, and I like to do another one with you, and we'll pick up from this. This will be part one. We'll pick up from this and do part two, which we'll talk about some of the downrange stories that we talked about. Are you good with that?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Dude, I'd
Dude, because
be honored to come on anytime you let me.
this is, I mean, I know we've jumped a lot of stuff. I know there's probably, like you said, there's so many other things to cover, but in the theme of Lima Charlie, I mean, I want to kind of focus on that, but it's just you've done a lot. I mean, I'm still just floored by the dive school thing. I mean, it is. I know what it takes. Not only the huevos, but just the luck, the getting the right person, the grace of God to have. So many people want to go do cool things and do schools and do this in the military, but they don't have the wherewithal or just the right opportunity to make something happen. And I mean, that's a phenomenal thing to be down there next to the USS Arizona, and do all that. And again, well before you ever join Special Forces. I mean, that is just an amazing feat. And I'm trying to think about this backwoods boy from Appalachia trying to memorize dive tables. I'm just amazed by that, to be quite honest, because there was no risk
A
computers back
lot of
then.
homework. A lot of
You're
homework.
following you're following charts, you're moving this line to that line. Oh man, I can't even imagine. I'm just messing with you. But yeah, it's
Newton's law, Boyle's law.
yeah. Yeah, but yeah, we're gonna wrap this one because people only got to put so much time, and I don't want to just go on for hours and hours. But I would love to we'll have you back on. We'll do a second episode of this, and we'll cover more of the down. Well, we'll wrap up anything else we need to, and then we'll cover the downrange stories if that works for you, my brother.
Yes, sir, man. I appreciate it.
All
God
right,
bless you and thank you for
all
what you're
right.
doing.
Thank you, man. Hold fast. I'm going to play us out here, do the exit, and want to thank everyone for tuning in on this episode of Lima Charlie. Be sure you follow us on all of our socials and keep an eye out. We'll get the announcements out when we have part two on from this interview. But thank you so much again, Rusty, and you have a good evening, my friend.
You too. God bless you, brother.